I never meant to become a regular at the cafe on Hart Street. It just happened. It's small enough that the front door bell sounds louder than it should, and the tables wobble unless you wedge a sugar packet under the leg. Every Thursday, on my way back from the photo lab, I'd stop in for a black coffee I never finished. I like the quiet. No one asked questions when you sat alone with your phone face down. I'd scroll, start a text to someone I shouldn't, delete it, then scroll again. That was my ritual. Coffee going lukewarm, thumb hovering over send. She worked the counter some days, some nights. Mid-40s maybe, hair tucked into a low knot, sleeves rolled neatly above her elbows like she was about to do something careful. I'd noticed how she pressed the lid on each takeaway cup with both thumbs, quick but precise. The first time she spoke to me, she got my order right before I said it. "Black, no room?" she asked, glancing up. I nodded, startled. "Yeah, thanks." Her eyes were dark, brown, but they caught light like a deeper color. She smiled without showing teeth, like a secret she wasn't sharing. When she turned to the machine, I noticed a faint crease at the corner of her mouth. Not a flaw, just a history. I sat by the window, next to a plant that had lost half its leaves. The city outside was gray, buses sighing at the stop. She brought the cup over herself, even though they usually called names. "Here," she said softly. "It's too quiet to shout." I laughed, a small sound. "Appreciate it." That became our rhythm. She'd remember my order. I'd pretend not to wait for it. Some weeks she'd ask if my photos were turning out, like she actually cared. Once, when the cafe emptied, we both reached for the sugar packets to fix my wobbly table at the same time. Our hands brushed. She pulled hers back first. "You're here a lot," she said, eyes flicking to my phone. "I guess," I said. "Helps me think." She tilted her head, like she wanted to ask more, but didn't. Then she wiped the counter, even though it was clean. I started noticing details. Her silver ring turned inward on her finger, a thermos by the register, a paperback with a folded receipt as a bookmark. Tiny signals of a life that didn't fit the shift she worked. That Thursday, she wasn't behind the counter when I walked in. I took my usual seat, scrolling, starting a message, deleting it. When she finally appeared, she was in street clothes, jacket unbuttoned, hair loose. She sat at my table without asking. "I'm off tonight," she said. Her voice was softer than usual, like she was still deciding whether to be here. I folded my napkin until it was a tight square. "Oh, lucky break." Something like that. She looked out the window, then back at me. "Do you always sit alone?" I shrugged, feeling my ears heat. "Guess so." She nodded once, almost imperceptibly, then stood. "I've got to go." "Girls' night out," she added with a small, practiced smile. I watched her walk out into the gray evening. Jacket collar lifted against the wind. My coffee had gone cold. On my phone screen, a new message lit up. "Not what I told you. Not really a girls' night. Want to talk?" I stared at it, thumb hovering, the bell above the cafe door still ringing in my ears. The message stayed on my phone all night. I typed a reply twice, erased it twice. In the end, I wrote only, "You okay?" She never answered, but the next Thursday she was back behind the counter like nothing had happened. I wasn't sure whether to mention it. Instead, I ordered my coffee, sat at my table, and watched the plant by the window surrender another leaf. Half an hour later, she walked over with 2 mugs, not the paper cups. "House tea," she said. "On the house. You look like you need something warm." I tried a small smile. "Thanks." She sat opposite me. The cafe was almost empty. The espresso machine hissed in the corner like a tired animal. She wrapped both hands around her mug, fingers pale from the heat. "Long night?" she asked. I shrugged. "Just thinking too much." She blew on her tea, eyes fixed on the rising steam. "I do that too. After my shift, I sometimes drive around for a while before going home. It's easier than going straight back." That was the first personal thing she'd ever told me. I looked at her, waiting for more. "I live on the edge of town," she said after a pause. "Quiet street. My son's at university now. House feels bigger than it should." She gave a tiny, self-mocking laugh and sipped her tea. I fiddled with the handle of my mug. "I moved here after a breakup. Thought new scenery would help me focus on my work. But mostly I just end up here." She nodded slowly. "Photographs of what?" People, I said, but not the smiling kind. Candid stuff. The in-between moments. Something flickered across her face, like she recognized herself in that answer. For a while we sat in silence. She tapped her nails lightly against the ceramic, a soft metronome. I imagined her son's age, probably not far from mine, and felt a weight settle behind my ribs. When she finally spoke again, her voice was quiet. My friends call it girls' night out, but it's really just dinner with one other woman from work. She thinks I should meet someone. I don't tell her I'm not sure I want to. I stared into my tea. Seems complicated. It is. She gave a quick smile. Sorry. Too much information for a customer. You're not just... I stopped, not sure what I was about to say. She tilted her head. Not just what? Not just someone who makes my coffee. Her eyes held mine for a second too long, then dropped to the table. That's kind of you. I felt my throat tighten. All at once I imagined her driving home to the quiet house, the thermos waiting by the door, the son who texted but didn't visit. I imagined walking past her window, seeing her at the kitchen table, the two of us separated by glass. The bell over the door rang as a couple came in, breaking the moment. She stood, smoothing her apron. I should get back. But before she left, she reached across and slid a napkin toward me. On it, written in looping blue ink, was an address, not the cafe's. For the plant, she said lightly. It needs better light. If you want to bring it by, my place has a sun porch. I looked at the napkin, then at her. She was already walking away, but when she glanced back, her eyes held a question she didn't voice. I tucked the napkin into my jacket pocket, fingers brushing the soft paper as though it were something more than an address. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. I brought the plant to her house on a rainy afternoon. The sun porch smelled of wet wood and lemons. Water pooled under the pots like small mirrors. She stood barefoot on the tile, rolling up her sleeves, hair damp from the walk back from the car. Just put it anywhere, she said. Her voice was softer than in the cafe, like she'd been saving it. I set the plant down, brushing rain off my jacket. Looks better already, I murmured. She smiled, quick and almost shy, then crouched to adjust a pot. Her shirt pulled at the shoulder. I looked away too late. Tea? She asked without looking up. Sure. She moved around her kitchen with a quiet efficiency, hands steady, eyes a little distant. I noticed a photo of a young man on the fridge, her son, maybe. A sticky note covered half his face. Call about tuition. We sat across from each other at a narrow table. Steam rose from the cups between us. The rain tapped at the windows, an irregular beat. You're quiet, she said. I traced the rim of my mug. I don't want to intrude. You're not. She hesitated, fingers tightening on her cup. It's nice, having someone here. The words hung there, heavier than they should have been. Before I could answer, a car pulled into the driveway. Headlights swept across the porch. She stiffened. It's just a neighbor, she said quickly, but she didn't stand. She stayed perfectly still until the engine faded. I sipped my tea, heart thudding. Do people come by often? Sometimes. She smiled thinly. People like to check on me. Too much. The silence after that was thicker. She reached out to adjust the plant's leaves, but her hand stopped halfway, as if remembering itself. I wanted to tell her about the breakup, about how I'd been taking photos of strangers just to feel less alone. Instead, I said, I should go soon. Her eyes flicked up, searching mine. If you need to. Neither of us moved. The clock on the stove clicked once. Rain slowed to a drizzle. She brushed a strand of hair from her face and left her hand resting on the table, palm open, inches from mine. I didn't take it. I only looked at it, then at her, and she looked back. For a second, the space between us felt like something we could cross. Her lips parted, maybe to speak, maybe to breathe. Then she drew her hand back, slowly, as if it burned. You should go, she said softly. I stood, nodding, but at the door I looked back. She was still seated, hands in her lap, staring at the plant like it was a question she couldn't answer. It was late afternoon when I saw her outside the cafe, locking the door early. She spotted me across the street and gave a small wave, the kind people give when they're not sure if you'll cross over. I did. Everything okay? I asked. Short staffed today, she said. Needed a break. She hesitated. Walk with me. We went down Hart Street, past the shuttered bookstore and the bus stop where the timetable always hung crooked. The air was heavy with the smell of wet concrete. Puddles held the last of the rain like pieces of glass. She carried her thermos, turning it slowly in her hands. I almost didn't text you the other night, she said. I glanced at her. But you did. I did, she echoed, like the words were heavier than they looked. We reached the park at the edge of the neighborhood, sat on a bench still damp from rain. She kept her jacket zipped, even though the air was warm. You've been quiet lately, she said. I shrugged, trying not to read too much into things. Her fingers tightened on the thermos lid. What things? Us. The word came out before I could stop it. A bird startled from a nearby tree, wings slicing the air. She looked away, eyes on the ground. You're young, she said finally. And she didn't finish. I don't care about that, I said, softer than I meant to. She turned back, expression flickering between something like relief and something like alarm. You should. Silence stretched. I traced circles on the bench with my thumb. She uncapped the thermos, poured tea into the lid cup, set it between us. I told my friend about you, she said quietly. She thinks I'm reckless. My heart caught. And what do you think? I think she stopped. Her throat moved as she swallowed. I think it's been a long time since someone looked at me the way you do. The confession hung between us like the smell of rain. I wanted to reach for her hand, but kept mine on my knee, knuckles white. I don't know what you want from me, she added, almost a whisper. I don't either, I said. I just know I keep ending up where you are. She gave a small, sad laugh. That's not nothing. A man walked by with a dog, nodding hello. She stiffened until he passed, then exhaled. I don't do this, she said. I don't invite people into my life. My son's your age. People would talk. I'm not people, I murmured. She looked at me then, really looked, eyes wide and unguarded. That's exactly the problem. We sat like that, the distance between our shoulders smaller than it had been, but still a distance. She sipped from the cup, then handed it to me without speaking. Our fingers brushed, warm against warm. I should stop this, she said, almost to herself. Do you want to? Her answer was a pause long enough for the clouds to shift. I don't know, she said at last. I don't know what's worse, wanting or not wanting. The park was empty now. My hand inched closer on the bench, stopping just short of hers. She didn't move away. Sometimes, she whispered, I wish I were someone else. Someone who could just, she trailed off, shaking her head. Me too, I said. Her eyes met mine, the faintest tremor at the corner of her mouth. She opened her lips as if to speak, but only breathed in. The question hovered there, unspoken, in the inches of air between us. What happens if we stop pulling back? She stopped working Thursdays. The first week I walked to the cafe at my usual time, only to see someone else behind the counter, a teenager with earbuds who didn't look up. I asked if she was on break. The kid just shrugged. The second week, I didn't even go in. I watched from across the street, waiting for her to appear, but she didn't. I told myself I was busy, editing photos, answering emails. But every time my phone lit up, I half expected her name, even though she'd never called me once. On the third Thursday, a text came, late at night. We shouldn't keep meeting like this. No greeting, no signature. I typed why, deleted it. Typed, what's wrong? Deleted that too. In the end, I sent nothing. A few days later, a photo popped up on my feed, her with a man I'd never seen, taken at some charity event. His hand rested on the small of her back. She wasn't smiling at him, not really, but she wasn't moving away either. I stared at the screen until it dimmed. When I finally did go back to the cafe, she was there, but in street clothes, sitting at a corner table with paperwork spread around. She looked up as I entered, expression unreadable. Hi, I said. Hi. Her voice was soft but flat. I hovered by her table. You've been away. I picked up extra shifts at the hospital, she said. Needed the hours. Hospital. I do admin 2 nights a week. Didn't I tell you? No, I said, and it came out sharper than I meant. She blinked. I didn't think it mattered. I wanted to ask about the man in the photo, about the text. Instead, I said, the plant's doing fine. Good, she murmured, already gathering her papers. We sat in silence, me standing, her sitting, both of us pretending not to notice the small tremor in our hands. Finally, she looked up. "My ex-husband's back in town," she said, like she was announcing a weather change. "He's been helping with some bills while our son finishes school. He means well." I opened my mouth, then closed it. She waited, then nodded, as if that was the response she'd expected. "I have to go," she said, slipping her papers into a folder. "Another shift tonight." I followed her outside. Rain had started again, misty and cold. We stood under the awning, neither moving. "Why did you text me?" I asked finally. She pressed her lips together. "Because it was easier than saying it in person. And now, I don't know." She met my eyes for the briefest second, then looked at the street. "I don't know what I'm doing." The bus hissed to a stop nearby. She stepped toward it, then hesitated. "You should stop coming here," she said quietly. "It'll be better." She climbed on, not looking back. I stood in the rain, watching the bus pull away, a yellow blur swallowed by mist. On my phone, the unsent message still sat in the text box. "I'm not asking for more. I just don't want to disappear." I didn't hit send. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence that I didn't see her for 2 weeks. The plant on my windowsill thrived in the slanted winter light while I scrolled past her name, thumb hovering. One evening, near closing, I walked past the cafe and saw only stacked chairs and dark windows. But across the street, at the bus stop, she stood with her thermos tucked under one arm, head bowed against the wind. I crossed without thinking. "Need a ride?" She looked up, surprised. For a second her face softened, then smoothed over. "I was going to take the bus." "I know," I said. Still. She hesitated, then nodded. "Okay." We drove in silence through wet streets, wipers clicking a slow rhythm. She gave directions with small gestures, hand rising, falling, then folding back into her lap. When we reached her street, she didn't get out right away. "Do you want to come in for tea?" she asked finally, eyes still on the windshield. Inside, her kitchen smelled of ginger and laundry soap. A single bulb over the sink cast a yellow circle. She set the thermos on the counter, then filled the kettle. "I didn't mean to disappear," she said quietly. "I didn't mean to crowd you," I said. She gave a tiny, dry laugh. "We're both good at not meaning to." The kettle clicked off. She poured water over 2 bags and mismatched mugs. We sat at the table where the photo of her son still hung on the fridge. She pushed one mug toward me, but kept her hands wrapped around hers. "My ex isn't coming back," she said after a while. "He's just passing through. He's always passing through." She stared at the steam. "But when he's around, I start feeling like I'm still married to the idea of him. And then I don't know who I am with anyone else." I wanted to say something but couldn't. She looked up at me. "I'm scared of being seen and then being left. That's all this is." I felt my chest tighten. "I'm scared of wanting more than I'm allowed to ask for," I said. "I keep thinking about you even when I tell myself not to." Her fingers loosened on the mug. "I keep thinking about you, too," she whispered. The clock over the stove ticked. The rain had stopped, but the world outside felt wet and new. "I don't know what this is supposed to be," I said. "I don't even know if it's supposed to be anything." She reached across the table, slow and deliberate, and placed her hand over mine. Her palm was warm, heavier than I expected. "It doesn't have to be anything," she said. "It can just be honest for a minute." We sat like that, our hands still, our tea cooling. Her thumb moved once across my knuckles, a small, grounding gesture. "I don't want to hide," she said. "Me neither," I said. She gave a small nod, almost like a bow. "Then let's not, at least right now." For the first time since we met, neither of us looked away. The kettle on the counter pinged as it cooled, the only sound in the room. She smiled then, not a practiced cafe smile, but a real one, small and tired and real. "Okay," she murmured. I squeezed her hand back. "Okay." By spring, the plant had outgrown its pot. She'd repotted it on her sun porch one Sunday morning while I held the new soil bag open for her. That was how most things started to feel between us. Not big declarations, just small tasks done together, hands brushing, then staying. We didn't meet at the cafe anymore. She still worked there some shifts, but more of our time belonged to kitchens and porches, to walks through the park after the rain. At 8:47 a.m. most Thursdays, my phone buzzed with a simple text, "Black coffee?" and I'd show up at her door instead of a counter. Her son visited twice that summer. He was polite, curious about my photography, but mostly wrapped up in his own plans. She watched us talk with a soft pride that had no edge in it. I could see the relief in her shoulders when he left again, knowing she hadn't hidden anything. There were still pauses. Days she'd retreat. Nights I'd go off to shoot a project and not text back. But the silence stopped feeling like punishment and more like space we allowed each other. One evening we walked back to the same bench where we'd first sat in the park. The puddles were gone now. Kids played in the grass nearby. She carried her thermos. I had my camera bag. We sat, and without needing to speak, she poured tea into the small lid cup and passed it to me. "I was thinking about that day," she said quietly. "What day? When you said you didn't know what we were." She gave a small smile. "Neither did I. I still don't have a name for it." I sipped the tea. "Maybe we don't need one." She nodded, her eyes on the trees. "Maybe not." The wind lifted a strand of her hair. I reached out and tucked it behind her ear without thinking. She didn't flinch. At her house later, we sat at the kitchen table with our mugs cooling, the same way we had the night everything cracked open. She took my hand across the table, not tentative this time, but steady, like a habit she'd grown into. "This feels like a life," she said softly. "It does," I said. "Not perfect." "No," she said, "but ours." We smiled at that, the quiet kind of smile people give when they've earned it. Weeks blurred into months. I picked up steady assignments. She shifted her cafe shifts to mornings and took on fewer hospital nights. At 8:47 a.m. the texts kept coming. Sometimes just a coffee emoji, sometimes a photo of the plant reaching toward the glass. We still went back to the bench now and then, a small ritual. The black coffee, the thermos of tea, the two of us sitting in the same space where everything had almost, but not quite, begun. One morning, while she poured the tea, she glanced at me with a look that was both question and answer. I only smiled, and she smiled back. That was enough. I didn't feel like life had given me a grand ending. It felt like life had finally finished the sentence it had paused midway. And sitting there with her, the plant thriving at home, the thermos between us, the world going quietly on, I thought, this is what staying looks like. A small, private thought, but ours alone.